Sir Keir Starmer, Your Majesty.
Your Majesty.
You must be utterly exhausted and nearly on your knees.
Not much.
Quite a chronic. Yes. Anyway, you're here.
And we have strongly opposed the expansion of military operations and settler violence and the blocking of humanitarian aid.
Just minutes after shocking details about a covert UK-EU backroom deal that many call the ultimate Brexit betrayal surfaced, King Charles reportedly erupted in rage at Prime Minister Keir Starmer, throwing Buckingham Palace into complete chaos in a moment no one saw coming. The normally calm monarch was furious, pacing the royal hallways, banging his hand on his desk, and demanding answers, according to palace insiders. Witnesses speak of a rare royal rage that hasn't been witnessed since his mother's iron rule. And the object of his anger? Keir Starmer himself, whose private handshake with EU officials has apparently reignited old scars over national confidence, sovereignty, and the legacy of Brexit itself. Insider reports claim that the king was taken by surprise and was only notified after the documents were signed. The events that transpired next were nothing short of explosive. We're talking about yelling, flushed faces, and terrified royal aides being led from the room. Was the crown being deliberately ignored? Has a constitutional crisis been triggered by Starmer? The nation is watching tonight as Buckingham Palace gets ready to make a rare and urgent statement, and the friction between the monarchy and Downing Street has never been more evident.
To King Charles, and this is interesting because he did the opening of Parliament and he had to read out what the Prime Minister was saying for him. And the Prime Minister doesn't want hereditary peers.
This isn't just politics anymore, so get some popcorn. It's intimate. Stay tuned, because what comes next could shake the very foundations of British power. Watch till the end, because this is one royal showdown you do not want to miss. The secret pact with Brussels. It was supposed to be a standard ceremonial event, an additional handshake, signature, and symbolic acknowledgement of Great Britain's democratic apparatus. However, the events that transpired at Buckingham Palace shortly after Prime Minister Keir Starmer arrived to brief King Charles III would destroy any sense of harmony between Downing Street and the Crown. A tremendous encounter unmatched in contemporary royal memory took place in the golden halls that previously reverberated with generations of diplomacy. Afterward, witnesses, including royal advisors, palace aides, and one shaky cabinet minister, would murmur that Charles was not just furious, he was unrecognizable. Why? A late-night treachery over Brexit. Charles saw it as nothing less than political treachery, even though it had been disguised as economic cooperation. Years of constitutional battle, national identity, and, in the king's private opinion, popular will were undermined when the United Kingdom re-entered important sectors of the European Union's regulatory orbit without first consulting the public. And only a minute after the official briefing started in that opulent drawing room, King Charles lost his mind. It began with footnotes rather than a big bang. Departmental briefings contain a few phrases that allude to mutual recognition and regulatory convergence. On the surface, it appeared to be bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does, which is to update standards, facilitate trade, and prevent another food export disaster. However, policy aides started whispering in the back hallways of Westminster. Why was DEFRA meeting with EU agriculture representatives? For what reason did the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency use draft language from the EU? Above all, what was the reason for the Foreign Office's remarkable silence? The Brexit legacy was being quietly overthrown. In the traditional cloak and dagger fashion, the bombshell arrived in an unlabeled envelope. The document, which was presented to a top palace assistant as a draft budget, was anything but standard. A multi-departmental accord, headed by Keir Starmer's cabinet, was described in its contents. Despite not being called a treaty, it was still legally binding. Food imports from the UK would now follow EU inspection procedures. In certain pharmaceutical issues, the European Court of Justice would serve as the ultimate arbiter, and even environmental goals were compared to EU climate directives rather than UK law. This went beyond simple cooperation. Without the drama of a referendum and the approval of the general public, it was a silent reabsorption. There was a political Molotov cocktail on the desk of the palace. During his early reign, King Charles had been on a tightrope. Charles had learned the art of regal neutrality from his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. So far, Charles saw this as a matter of sovereignty rather than trade or climate. The people had voted for Brexit. It had been carried out by Parliament. Nevertheless, it was done covertly, avoiding the public and Parliament. To make matters worse, the king had not been informed until the signatures were dry. For a man who was a strong supporter of constitutional integrity, this was more than just a violation. It was an embarrassment. According to insiders, the king called in his private secretary and started writing a private message, addressed to the Speaker of the House rather than the Prime Minister. A line had been crossed in the Constitution. It has been alleged that Charles confronted the Prime Minister's emissary at a private meeting in Sandringham. The king's tone, according to witnesses, was more acerbic than ever. He brought up ethical issues in addition to legal ones. One report claims that he stated, "You do not hand back powers without telling the people." Then comes the expression that is currently reverberating in political circles. This isn't in line. This is a betrayal of trust, honesty, and sovereignty. The king started holding private talks with constitutional experts, according to palace sources. Despite his inability to veto legislation, his symbolic influence might force a constitutional reckoning. Peers in the Lords started discussing royal assent delays behind closed doors, a tacit protest that is uncommon in contemporary politics. Critics, both inside and outside of Keir Starmer's party, sent blood even if his government maintains that this is about stability and economic growth. According to the released documents, state personnel were instructed not to use the phrase EU reintegration in any internal communications. It's all about efficiency in public. It's about creeping control in private. Remember that the public's tolerance for EU interference in Northern Ireland had previously been put to the test by the Windsor Framework. In contrast, this cuts much deeper into UK autonomy. Will this lead to calls for a second vote on the betrayal of Brexit rather than Brexit itself? This scandal is more than just a political one. It's a combination of a Brexit betrayal, a royal crisis, and a constitutional flashpoint. Charles may start the most serious monarch versus government conflict since the Edward VIII abdication crisis if he retaliates openly or even quietly. But this time, the focus will be on power, sovereignty, and who gets to choose the country's future rather than love and scandal. What about the people? They are only now realizing what transpired while they were preoccupied with royal health scares, NHS lines, and inflation. Time is running out. The king is also observing. The meeting. Royal rage erupts. It was 10:02 a.m. when the king entered the White Drawing Room. The king's punctuality is a psychological tactic, not just a matter of formality. Entering as a man betrayed rather than as a ceremonial figurehead, Charles is dressed with impeccable accuracy and has a gleam of steel in his eyes. With its pastel decor and tall windows, the White Drawing Chamber is often a place of dignified serenity, but it is about to be transformed into a battle chamber. His private secretary follows him, his mouth clenched, his silence deafening, like a guy preparing for political violence. This is not your typical meeting. Despite having played every room in Westminster, Keir Starmer misinterpreted it today. Taking usual royal reverence for trust, he enters with the composure of a lawyer. Charles is unaware that he has read every Brussels back channel and leaked memo. The king does not have a smile. He is furious. The bow, no use. The salutation, empty. The lion is fully awake because Starmer entered the lion's den directly. The air is cut like a razor by Charles's voice. This isn't a passive monarch stamping script. This is a man whose lineage has endured intrigues, divorces, and Diana. He was brought up in an era of empire and scandal. The word betrayal is not only dramatic, it is a deliberate choice, intentional, and devastating. Employees remain still. One assistant lets her notepad fall. Even the experienced courtiers appear in disbelief. The room is now the king's, and he has spoken. This is the explosion's emotional core. Although Charles hasn't officially advocated for Brexit, insiders have long hinted at his covert support for national sovereignty. He viewed Brexit as a legacy, a return to British independence, rather than as a political issue. He now believes that Starmer has reversed that through covert discussions and trade alignments akin to those of the EU. Charles sees surrender rather than pragmatism. In a scene reminiscent of his father's notorious tirades, his voice shouts across the room as he bangs on the desk. This goes beyond trade. It's intimate. Starmer, caught off guard, clings to legalese. However, the details don't interest Charles. Reversible is a weak man's defense, according to the king, something you say after you've already blown it. The Prime Minister's bluster is ineffective. Charles thinks that they are slippery slopes back into the EU's orbit rather than steps. Despite his strategic skill, Starmer has understated the power the monarchy still wields, even in the background. Charles goes nuclear here. This is an allegation, not just rage. He charges Starmer with eschewing the very establishments that support democracy in Britain, without discussion, without permission, without telling the Crown. The sound of that triple hammer blow reverberates outside Buckingham Palace. It is both a clear warning and a ruthless critique of contemporary politics. Being a ceremonial relic is no longer enough for Charles. The gloves are removed as he assumes his power. In actuality, Keir Starmer has dabbled in soft Brexit 2.0, aiming for deeper EU links through standards cooperation and trade alignment. Critics claim that his pledge of no rejoining is only a phony Brexit. Charles is expressing that tension here. Palace insiders have long implied that Charles sees Brexit as an issue of national dignity, even if he has never publicly stated his views. He is seen as a traditionalist who is suspicious of technocrats in Brussels. What was his response in this scene? It was unheard, until now, but not unfathomable. Despite being hypothetical, this encounter captures the actual power imbalance between the Queen and the Prime Minister. What transpires in that room might reverberate through power corridors for decades, even while the cameras are off. Furthermore, Charles is more than just a symbolic figure. He is powerful. The symbolic storm, Charles versus Parliament. The King's abrupt move was what made this moment historic, not merely the stress. King Charles called in Lord Chamberlain, one of the most senior members of the royal household, and began a constitutional review in a surprising and audacious reaction to Prime Minister Keir Starmer's decision, which was allegedly related to rejoining parts of the EU. Monarchs don't take this lightly. Since they are so uncommon, several politicians believed that the monarchy had long since stopped using them. Charles lacked the legal authority to halt Parliament, but the symbolism was powerful. He was expressing that the Crown has doubts, and the country ought to. Charles remained silent. It was not him who barged into Westminster. However, his message was so loud that the monarchs lost trust in the government's leadership. He leveraged the weight of royal symbolism to convey a clear and deadly message. This was not business as usual. This was accomplished by simply asking for a review, a move that bears no official legislative authority. The effect? In Westminster, the air became charged. The politicians rushed. Constitutional attorneys appeared live on television. Social media took off. In Buckingham Palace, too? The phones fell silent, consciously. Royal spokesmen silenced by lunchtime, but not Britain's infamously combative tabloids. The Sun exclaimed, "Charles go nuclear on Keir," in all caps. More conservative and monarchy-aligned, the Telegraph hinted about an impending constitutional Cold War. The message conveyed by each headline was the same. A hallowed object had broken. There was no longer any adherence to the unspoken rule that the monarch should remain above the political fracas, or, at any rate, no longer being taken seriously. Anonymous insiders claimed that Charles gave careful thought to using the royal assent delay clause, a little-known and essentially unutilized strategy. This provision gives the king the authority to temporarily halt the government's progress by delaying the final ceremonial ratification of legislation. Imagine that Charles declines to sign a contentious EU-related bill that the Prime Minister has pushed through at the last minute, delaying its enactment and causing a political catastrophe. It has symbolic meaning. However, it would be a seismic event in politics. Downing Street was frightened just thinking about it. A sovereign's statement, a rare televised royal address to the country, was later rumored to be even more ambitious. Queen Elizabeth II's mournful message during the COVID-19 crisis, intended to reassure a nation in mourning and anxiety, was the last time the public saw one. But this would not be a speech of consolation. A king would have to choose a side, a king or queen entering the constitutional quagmire head first. It was reported that senior advisors were appalled. One cautioned, "This could tear the system apart." Charles, however, who has always been more idealistic than his austere mother, was unconvinced. According to a source close to the king, he no longer cared about optics. He was concerned with principles. A nation divided, a monarchy awakened.
I've always had the greatest admiration for Canada's unique identity, which is recognized across the world.
The air became electrified as Westminster came into dusk. "Defend the crown!" roared through the streets. Portraits of King Charles were raised by pro-Brexit supporters who viewed him as a symbol of royal resistance, while British flags fluttered like war banners. Driven by pure annoyance, these were loyalist uprisings, rather than merely protests. They saw Charles as the final barrier against what they perceived to be a gradual capitulation to Brussels. The BBC was told by one marcher, "Politics has nothing to do with this. This pertains to our identity. The people have been represented by the king." Pro-EU organizations held smaller but equally impactful rallies in the meanwhile. "Europe is our future," and "Monarchy out of politics" are printed on placards. Candlelight vigils and demands for constitutional clarification coexisted in Soho and Islington. This was cultural warfare, not merely a political conflict. According to reports, Prime Minister Keir Starmer was livid but composed inside Number 10. However, behind his composed exterior, the walls were starting to shake. Just before midnight, two junior ministers, both from historically monarchist seats, submitted their resignations. In a united statement, they charged Starmer with disregarding the nation's pulse and treating constitutional tradition with contempt. Other members of Parliament started muttering insurrection, especially in the northern Red Wall constituencies. A possible no-confidence vote was being drafted, according to sources close to the 1922 committee, and not just by conservatives. The sight of a prime minister arguing with the king about national sovereignty even shocked some Labour backbenchers. The Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace was quiet, but the private rooms were noisy. Usually reserved and tactful, King Charles had done the unimaginable by openly criticizing the current Prime Minister's EU plan. According to one source, His Majesty said during tea with Queen Camilla, It's okay if this is the hill I have to fall on. I will not rule a Britain that is confined to Europe. If confirmed, those remarks would become part of royal history. No king had demonstrated such political clout and personal resolve since George V's wartime broadcasts or Edward VIII's abdication. Stunned but devoted, palace aides started searching royal archives for old legal precedents, including records from the Glorious Revolution and the English Civil War. Their goal? To demonstrate that in exceptional national situations, the monarch still has emergency constitutional powers. Diplomats in Brussels are said to have hoisted glasses in silent celebration as Europe watched the UK's royal drama play out. The public was caught off guard by Starmer's unexpected move to resume official EU alignment negotiations. But the EU elite was not. One Belgian minister wrote in a private tweet that was swiftly removed. Starmer's chess move was excellent. The king is still a checkers player. However, things were more gloomy back in Britain. The quickness and secrecy of Starmer's move were questioned even by centrists and moderate royalists. The headlines of tabloids shrieked, "Crown in crisis! Britain is ruled by whom? Commons versus King." The feeling of betrayal was profound, and it extended beyond the Prime Minister to the system as a whole. Britain is currently facing a constitutional reckoning rather than just a political impasse. It was not until the 1830s that a king publicly opposed a government's stance. Few surviving Britons have ever seen the palace hint at a return to active involvement, which is now happening in 2025. What's at stake? Monumental. The monarchy may become irreversibly damaged and seen as helpless in times of national emergency if King Charles is compelled to flee. If he wins, parliamentary supremacy will be dealt a severe blow, and a precedent for royal intervention in contemporary governance would be established. What about Starmer? He is both a villain and a dreamer. He is seen by some as a strategist who is regaining Britain's standing in the world. He is perceived by some as a technocrat with a messiah complex who is prepared to destroy the country's spirit for the sake of European bureaucracy. Tonight, the kingdom is on the verge of collapse. The Prime Minister is in a difficult position. The king feels more confident. The populace is divided and furious. What, in your opinion, triggered King Charles? Will Britain ultimately reinterpret the monarchy and give it a legitimate voice in contemporary politics at this time? Or is it the start of a collapse of national identity, public trust, and royal credibility? Tell us in the comments section below. Make sure to subscribe right now to witness all the royal twists you won't see on the news.